Welcome to the Boss It Weekly podcast, a no-nonsense, no-hype, frank and close-up analysis of what is currently working and what is not in the world of software. The Boss It podcast is packed with major takeaways for software business owners and managers. So, let's begin.
And so another episode of the Boss It podcast. And today I've got somebody that I think is going to be very interesting for a lot of you out there developing technology, selling technology in the software world. And it's talking about speech technology. So I'm going to be introducing Nigel Cannings from Intelligent Voice. This is an area that I've been aware of for quite some time. And I've got a bit of a history there with Nigel and some of his other members of his team going back many, many years. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding, and I thought it'd be a really good opportunity to get Nigel to come on and to talk about this subject. I don't know where this conversation is going to go, and that's part of the excitement of podcasts, isn't it? It's just having a conversation and seeing where that will lead to. Nigel, thank you very much for coming onto the podcast. It's great to have you on there. There's a lot to cover with this topic, but maybe a good way to start was tell us about Intelligent Voice. What is it you do, and why is it important in today's world?
Well, Mark, thank you very much for having me on today. Yeah, Intelligent Voice, we're a speech technology company focused on privacy-sensitive environments. And the reason I'm so focused on the privacy-sensitive is because voice technology today has become really prevalent, actually. We're seeing it everywhere. You know, many of us have got Alexa in our house, or we use Siri on the phone. But as we've seen from some of the recent press coverage, all of that data is going to major corporates who are actually listening in to into what you're saying. So,
Yes.
You know, people in Romania are IMing conversations to each other, and even Apple this weekend have admitted that they're listening to Siri conversations. So we've spent the last almost 12 years now developing speech technology, particularly speech recognition technology, that provides all of that cloud power, but operates really well in areas where privacy is important. So imagine if you're calling a healthcare provider, you don't want that data being sent to Google.
Sure.
You know, imagine calling the government, litigation, financial services, all of these places where your information is pretty much sacrosanct. We've built technology to do that. So that, Mark, really is where we sit today.
So you've been looking and working in this area for 12 years, researching and developing what you do. And I think it's come a long way in people's understanding. But I guess that there are still some misconceptions and myths about speech technology that must probably be quite frustrating from your perspective. What are those sort of myths and misconceptions that you would like to sort of clarify?
Yeah, sadly we haven't got all day, Mark. But what I'll try and do is cut it down to
Yes.
a couple of key ones.
The most frustrating of those, put it that
the
way.
most frustrating.
Yes.
I think actually the biggest one for me at this point is that people misunderstand the output that they're expecting from speech technology, and they look at it as a kind of OCR for voice, really. This idea that you can take an audio file and a perfect transcript will appear, and somehow that will solve their problem. And there's a whole load of reasons why that's wrong. And kind of number one, I think, is for conversational speech. Even if I give you a perfect transcript, you won't actually be able to read it very easily. So it's if I gave you an hour-long conversation between two people, there are ums and buts, and the meat of the conversation might be hidden at minute 20.
Yes.
Because the first, you know, so there's all this, you know, so that for a start is one of them. It's understanding that really conversational speech is not like reading an email.
Do you think that a part of this misunderstanding, if we call it, is because people are always trying to relate it back to something that they know? You know, you said OCR for voice. It's because they're trying to put it in a box that they currently do understand, and it doesn't quite fit. It's a sort of the concept.
Yeah, and you and I have worked around document and records management for a long time, Mark. So
Yes.
we know, and that's kind of the box that people try and squeeze it into.
Yes.
Can I make it like an email?
Yeah.
Is what they want, and the fact is, it isn't like an email. It's in all sorts of ways, it's not like an email. And you've not thought about what you're saying beforehand. You're just kind of talking, and as I said, it's conversational. And the other thing is the technology that we use to capture it is actually, well, it's prehistoric almost. I mean, the codecs that we use, the compression that we use for telephone calls dates back to 1972.
Wow.
So yeah, I know exactly. That was the last time anyone bothered to update it in any significant way.
Yes.
And so what that means is it's heavily compressed. It's poor quality. And if Mark, you must have listened to yourself on a voicemail sometimes and thought, I don't sound like that.
Yes. Oh.
Yeah. Well,
all the time.
All the time, exactly.
Yes.
Well, a lot of that is because of the compression that's involved in something going over a telephone. You take out all of the top frequencies and all of the bottom frequencies, and that's why you sound kind of tinny.
Yes.
Because all of that's been taken out. So, and I often think of it like, imagine taking one of your beautiful photographs, Mark. So we all know that you're a fantastic photographer, and we took one of your beautiful photographs. But then what we did is we poured Coke all over it. Then we kind of screwed it up a bit.
I'm cringing as you're going through this.
I know, it's horrible,
assassination of one of my images.
Exactly. It's and I'm hoping no one listening to this is thinking that, God, that probably improves one of my photos with that.
Yeah.
And then maybe you set fire to one corner of it.
Yes.
And then you try and work out what the image is.
Yes.
I mean, effectively, that's what compression does to telephone speech.
So they're pouring Coke over your speech, and they're screwing it up, and they're setting fire to a bit, and then they're saying, "See what you can do with that." There you go.
Exactly. And
Yes.
what I want is 100% perfect accuracy out of that one.
Yes.
And it ain't gonna happen. It ain't gonna happen. So actually, what I would say to anyone who is thinking about engaging with speech technology, as in fact you would with anything, is think about the use case.
Yes.
What actually are you trying to do with this? Why is a perfect transcript good to you? And and I'm sure that for most people, and again, going back to the document and records management thing, for most of the people that we deal with, I would say that search is probably the number one priority, wouldn't you?
Yes.
In terms of, so, anyone that you're dealing with, they put stuff into a document management system so they can find it again.
Yes.
So what we do is we try and focus people on this and say, well, look, what we can do is probably make your transcript or the output from this 100% useful. So we can actually get all of the words and phrases out of it, which are actually really important to you. But don't worry about the ums and the buts and the, all those bits of the conversation which don't really matter. And let's focus on those bits that are important. So
you're taking something that's not perfect, but you're making it usable for the requirements of that solution. Because you're not sort of taking an unrealistic approach to say, well, when we've upgraded all of the systems and when the codex is updated from the 1972 version, we'll have something that's fantastic. You're actually working within those requirements, but you're able to produce a solution that works for the particular applications in which you're working.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that fundamentally is where people go wrong with speech technology. What they'll do is they'll say they'll run a sort of lab type of project, and they'll say, well, we'll send all our telephone speech off to Google's speech API, and then we'll get the transcript back. And this transcript's not very good. So what are we going to do with that? Let's try and put it through a machine learning tool. And the machine learning tool doesn't like it because it's not properly constructed sentences in real English, and so our natural language processing system doesn't work anymore. Well, of course it doesn't, because that's not what it was designed for.
Yes.
So yeah. Really, the absolute biggest frustration for me is that people don't really understand the technology, and frankly, they often don't want to. So we spend a lot of our time trying to educate people in how they can improve the outcomes, how they can improve the solutions. And those people who who are willing to engage in that process are the people who generally have very successful projects. The people who just say, well, we can just send it to Amazon, well, partly they've got a big privacy problem, and partly they've got a real technology problem because they're not actually getting the outcome that they need from it. So yeah, that for me is the absolute number one frustration.
Do you have an example that illustrates that, where you're able to take something that's not perfect, but actually you can create a very usable, a very valuable solution for an organization? You may, obviously, with the areas in which you work, they are highly confidential, so I'm not expecting you to sort of name names, but perhaps just talk us through where you've been able to provide, a very beneficial solution that probably surprises. I mean, I've been aware of some of the solutions that you put in, and I remember on one occasion being quite amazed by what it was able to reveal with a user that didn't have knowledge. They weren't having to apply their knowledge. It was your technology was actually bringing things to the surface. And I found that fascinating. But it would be interesting to talk us through perhaps an example.
Yes. Well, there you go. So that is the other side of what we do. Is we're not, when I always talk about us being a speech technology company rather than a speech recognition company, because we do have this ability to analyze files and tell people what's important within it. We have this smart transcript idea, which pulls out all the key things that were said and sticks them on one side. And there's, hey, here's a summary of what was in there, and then we can use that to abstract upwards. And my particular favourite was, and I'm not sure this is fit for broadcast, Mark. So I can see you're gonna cut.
No, we're very liberal here. Don't worry, you just go for it.
This is the R-rated version of it.
Okay.
So we did a job for a prison in a part of America that I shall not name at the moment, but they said, look, we've got all these prisoner phone calls, and prison phone call monitoring is big business in the US.
Yeah.
And every single phone call is recorded. And the idea is that you're supposed to use them for what they call harm reduction, which is basically to stop people being murdered, basically.
That's a good reason for putting in place a solution. Nice. It is. I like that. Yeah.
And also for things like they need to try and control drug dealing and actually people running gangs from jail.
Yes.
And there's also, anyway, so they gave us this data and they thought it was hilariously funny, these guys, because they're Americans, and they said none of this is in the Queen's English, ha ha ha, thinking how terribly amusing they were. And so we got the results back, and we produced the transcripts, and we produced this topic map of all the key things that have been said in these phone calls. And one of the topics that the system floated as being potentially anomalous was the phrase three-way. Now, we're pure old Englishmen,
yes.
Right? So our minds went in one direction, and but these guys looked at it and said, no, we must listen to this immediately. We're like, okay, fair enough. And anyway, as we started listening to the calls, what it actually was is, any of your American listeners will know that a three-way is, in telephony terms, is a conference call. So what would happen is someone would say, they'd phone up their mum, say, because you've only got a number of people that you're allowed to call.
Oh, okay.
And you've got your mum, your lawyer, your mistress, whatever it might be.
Yes. And
you phone them up, and they'd say, three-way me through to, I don't know, Big Pablo the Enforcer. And it's I'm probably gonna get shot by someone for this one. But,
probably by Big Pablo.
By Big Pablo, absolutely.
Yes.
Big Pablo, this is not directed at you,
No.
mate. All right, it's not. This is a completely generic enforcer name
Yes.
that we're coming up with.
It was another Big Pablo.
Another Big Pablo,
Yes.
Absolutely. It's little Pablo's brother. But anyway, so and what we'd identified was a whole bunch of phone calls where they were being routed through to other people who weren't actually authorized to receive phone calls, except for one, which was a little unfortunate, because we also came across a prisoner talking to his girlfriend, and he was soon to be released, and he was asking that his being released present was a three-way with another lady. So
Well, what an
Yeah.
exciting life you lead, Nigel. I didn't realise
Oh,
this.
I was going to say, there you go. Absolutely. So, Nigel Canning's pornographer in chief. I mean, it's terrible, isn't it? But actually, there's obviously a serious side to that,
Yeah.
which is we were able to find, some, potentially, if someone is calling someone, in that indirect way, deliberately in that indirect way, then obviously they're up to nefarious purposes. You don't call,
No.
you call your mum to speak to your mum. You
Yeah.
don't call your mum to speak to Big Pablo. So,
Yes.
so that's one example. There have been many over the years, but that is my particular favourite, I have to
So,
say.
I mean, that is a great example of where, without you having the knowledge in another country of not understanding or not understanding the terms in which it's being used there, what a three-way is, the system was able to pull that to the surface and highlight where there were people getting around the systems, getting around the prison rules, if you like, automatically.
Yeah.
It's highlighting that to you because I'm assuming you were analysing quite a few telephone calls, and on any telephone call there's a lot of information. For somebody to do that manually just to listen in, I mean, you would need almost an equal number of people listening to the call as you would prisoners, because that's ongoing all the
Exactly.
time. It's just an impossible task.
Exactly. And actually, a lot of what we do when we're implementing systems for people is helping them identify the things they should be looking out for.
Yes.
Because everyone's got a list in their mind. I mean, I'm sure that if you with a blank sheet of paper were going to try and design a compliance monitoring system for a bank, there'd be all sorts of things you'd think you should be looking out for.
Yes.
Types of words and so on. But actually, a lot of the time, the phraseology that people use is either deliberately obtuse or just not quite what you thought it might be.
Yes.
So using a system like ours, which does natural language processing alongside speech recognition, gives you the opportunity to build out a much richer search set and potentially across multiple languages. I mean, we're doing about, I think, 21 languages and dialects at the moment. So, we've got the ability to spread across large organisations rather than just relying on using US English, which seems to be the standard for most people.
Mm. What's another area where you find that people they have a sort of a misunderstanding around speech technology? I suppose it can go both ways. It's the sort of the magic, it can do everything, or it's not possible and it probably won't be possible for another 10 years because of X. Where are those frustrations?
Yeah, I mean, for me, a lot of that falls into the consumer sphere. And so, we as a company very much operate on a business-to-business type of basis.
Yes.
But actually, the majority of speech technology we see today is actually consumer-focused. So, I mean, I don't know, Mark, whether you've got an Alexa at home
Yes.
or anything like that. Well, there you go. So
Yes.
you like many of us, and you might use Siri on your phone as well from time to time. So there you go. In fact, I have to be careful saying that in case my phone pops up. So this does happen periodically. So
Yes.
I should have switched it off before I started. If you hear a nice lady talking in the background, it's my phone and not anyone else, I promise. But actually, but this is the danger, you see. So what's happened is we've had in the consumer sphere, we've had this massive uptake of voice technology.
Yes.
But actually most people use it for very limited things. So I was talking to someone the other day, market research person, who said that really home devices are mainly used for streaming music, asking what the weather is, asking what the news is, and in some cases recipes.
Yes.
And that's it. Which of course must be very frustrating for Amazon, who are basically flogging it to you to try and get you to buy stuff from them.
Yes.
I don't know. Have you ever bought anything using your Alexa device, Mark?
No, I haven't. I've not taken it that far. I think I would probably fall into the category that your researcher identified. It would be sort of pulling up information, sometimes for train times. It's worked quite well for that. I'm working around something else, and it will tell me I've got to go and catch a train. I need to know when to leave. I need to work that out. That's works quite well.
Yeah. But it's interesting. It's really limited at the moment in terms of what we can get out. But the thing there is the privacy problem, because And I talk about this idea of the magic pipe fallacy.
Yes.
So people have got this idea that when you speak into your Alexa device, I'm not going to say the name of the Apple one in case it does pop up, but you speak into your Alexa device, and they think there's a sort of magic pipe that exists between that little device sitting in their kitchen and the ultimate provider of the information. And I always think the scariest phrase in the English language is, Alexa, what's my bank balance?
Yes. Because
the thought that, I speak to Alexa and it doesn't talk to the bank, it talks to Amazon. And then Amazon say, oh, yeah, we need to find out what Nigel's bank balance is, so we're going to have a chat with Barclays about it. And then Barclays say, oh, this is how much money Nigel does or doesn't have in his bank account. And then it gets sent back to me. And all of that information is stored by Amazon.
Yes.
So,
it's just floating around out there. Yep.
It's floating around out there. And if, anyone who's been reading the papers recently, Amazon have had, there's been the scandal that people have been listening into Amazon conversations and IMing it to each other saying, isn't this fun? And then Google rather reluctantly said, oh, yes, so have we. And then Apple, who keep talking about how everything is private, they say privacy focused. Oh, yeah, well, we listen into Siri stuff as well. So I think that privacy is probably the biggest challenge in this sphere at the moment. So here's a question. Would you, Mark, ever use your Alexa device to get healthcare advice? How would you feel about that? No,
just wouldn't. No.
Okay,
I think searching out on the internet for healthcare advice, if it's something that's anything above trivial, I think it's very, very dangerous anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. But I don't know if you know this, but Amazon in their Alexa guys have just teamed up with NHS England to provide health advice through the Alexa. Did you catch that article?
No, I didn't.
Well, we ran a survey after this, and we asked 1,000 people how they felt about Amazon having access to private healthcare information. And it may not surprise you to hear that may not surprise you to hear that 60% of people felt uncomfortable. People over the age of 55, 75% of them felt uncomfortable. Although interestingly, people between 18 and 25, it was only about 50-50. Probably because they never think they're going to get ill and they're immortal.
Yes. Which
is, I certainly was immortal between the age of 18 and 25.
Yes.
But the point there really is that we're actually moving further and further and further towards a society where we're surrendering that. And for me, I think that what I would want the next wave of technology to look like is that we have voice assistants which act a lot more like web browsers.
Right.
So, you sit in front, today you check your bank balance and you see a little SSL certificate padlock which sits there and says you are securely connected to the bank. And all of those, and there's two-factor authentication, and there's all sorts of stuff going on there. I would like to see voice assistants doing that.
Yes.
But the question that you've got to ask is, how are Amazon going to feel about that?
Yes.
Do you honestly think that they're going to give up their home shopping portal just so Nigel feels a bit more comfortable about having his healthcare data, stored in the cloud and used by Amazon? I don't think they are. So that for me is probably the next wave of things that we have to start looking at.
Do you think that the publicity and the use in the B2C arena also helps you because it's more in the consciousness of people? They become more comfortable. They're thinking about voice technology, how it's helpful for them to a degree in their personal life, and then when they're going to work, they're thinking, well, actually, there must be a better solution here. We must be able to use this in the business environment. So that sort of raises the opportunity for you guys in starting those conversations. Or is it that it's so different that these issues aren't known, and actually it's more of a hindrance because they just expect it to be, I'll talk to Alexa and it will do all of this for me in the business. We just need a business version of Alexa.
It's a mixed bag, Mark, I'd say. I mean, you probably remember the first time you ever did a Google search and thought how wonderful it was.
Yes.
And then, you go into the office the next day and you think, well, why the hell can't I do this on my, on all the information that I hold in my business? And I think, in fact, most people today would still say it's really difficult to do a search across the documents that I hold in my business. 14 or 15 years after they probably did their first Google search.
Yes.
So, there is always that institutional inertia problem where it's not easy to get this type of technology in to the workplace. So yeah, on the one hand, I'd say it's opened up more conversations. And I used to, I remember in 2015, I gave a talk to a bunch of people in financial services, and I stood on stage and I had a slide which said 2015 is the year of voice, and I gave all these reasons for it. And then that didn't really come to pass. So then I said 2016 is the year of voice. And I kept doing this until about 2018, when finally I felt that people were beginning to take it seriously. So, it's, you kind of look pretty stupid when you've done it 4 years in a row like
But
that.
eventually you're going to be right. I mean, that's always...
Well, I have to be, don't I? Well, I think I'm hoping that 2019, I mean, certainly I have to say since 2016, we've seen a massive uptick in terms of the adoption of voice technology in the enterprise. And what we're seeing at the moment is people beginning to think about those privacy issues that I was talking about and saying, well, should we be building our own chatbot? Should we really be relying on the inbuilt stuff in Siri and Alexa and so on? And should we actually be building our own private chatbots? They do it for text at the moment. Mm. And so we are beginning to talk to people about voice enabling chatbots in the enterprise. Mm. But my, one of my frustrations again is that seems to be jumping to the wrong place. That actually you're probably much better off thinking about what is voice like as an enterprise record. So I don't know how. I mean, Mark, you probably know this better than I do. But what would you say? Would you say that most companies now have got some form of email search or archiving in place so their employees can kind of dig out stuff from the past?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. I think that's sort of fairly universal. Yeah.
Yeah. But if you and I had had this conversation 10 years ago, you probably would have said maybe only 20 or 30% have got that.
Yes. That's true.
So we've seen, we've seen that email is now accepted as a record in business, not just from a legal perspective, but it's actually useful. Mm. We use it as an archive mechanism to go back and say, oh yeah, I remember that, we did a project for so-and-so. I think that voice has yet to enter that arena. Mm. I think that for most companies, unless they're forced to record their telephone calls, which tends to be financial services, insurance, government, as I said, the prison, that type of stuff, highly regulated environments. Other people just treat it as a very ephemeral type of thing. I had a phone call and it disappears again.
Yes.
And I'd like to, and I know that you and I have spoken about this in the past. I mean, I'd really like to see companies beginning to think: is there value in these voice conversations? Can I store them? Can I mine data from them? And really begin to see the value in it.
Well, let's talk a little bit about some of the different sectors that are recording, because there in certain vertical sectors like banking, for instance, there has been an exponential rise in the amount of audio that they've been capturing and storing. Perhaps talk about some of the applications of the speech technology where that's in place, and what are the problems that you're solving for them in those areas?
Yeah, so banking, banking's a really interesting one, because when I first started the business, which is kind of around 2008, I honestly looked at it and I thought, oh, there's all these people who've been caught doing nasty things on telephones. Surely banks will be interested in investing in technology which will help them stop people doing it again, which was sadly misguided of me, as it turned out, because the money got spent on people rather than technology at that point. And what we've seen is that pressure is now coming from regulators specifically onto banks, saying you must monitor what people say on the telephone. You must make sure that you've got procedures in place which ensure that certain things are said, certain things aren't said, and that extends across all forms of electronic communications. And for a while, people were trying to do all of it. They were trying to do email, instant messaging, and voice all in one process. Yes. But what we've seen is people are splitting this out a bit now into what they call the ecoms and acoms. So, the E being the electronic and the A being the audio piece, which was quite interesting for me because I've always looked at this holistically myself, and the people that we work with generally we try and go for a holistic solution across kind of all channels. But
that to me makes sense, because I think that there are times when you are searching for information, you're searching for data, and you need information, but do you care necessarily where that source of information is? You might need to reference back to it, but I want information on a particular topic that's very key to me right now, and I want data from within my organization to find out what we as an organization know, whether it's held in a document, a video, a telephone recording, or maybe it's even in a PDF somewhere. I want to first of all have a look at that and gather the data, and then perhaps make a deeper dive. More of a holistic approach to that seems to make sense.
Yeah, it does, and actually, people that we work with generally come round to that, but still there's this kind of you'll see a lot of consultants advocating a split between the two. I think partly because they don't necessarily understand how you might implement a technology like this to really make it effective. So for us, a lot of the work that we're doing is around helping banks, in that case, listen into all of the data that's going through, not just the audio, but email and IM as well, picking out those things which are potentially worthy of review, placing them into a review queue, and then allowing a human to say, actually, that's all right, that's not all right, and then sending it back around the loop again, and therefore improving the review. The more you review, the easier it is to weed out the false positives next time, the easier it is to ensure that you're reviewing the right sort of stuff. And the benefit for an organization there, in a sense, is kind of a soft one, really, that the regulator says you've got to do it, and if you're doing it, then the chances of you being hit with a fine in the future are lower than they were previously. Yes. And I think the fines got to the point where even the shareholders and the CFO was sitting up and saying, how many zeros on that fine? You promised me there'd be two fewer zeros on that one. And I think that was it was a really complacent attitude post 2008 that people thought, we might get fined 10, 20 million. So do we really need to invest in this type of technology? And when the fine reaches 1 or 2 billion or whatever it might be, people begin to think that the technology is probably a bit more cost effective than they thought previously.
See that grabbing their attention. Yes, putting a few zeros at the end of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's that's a big one in terms of where we're working. But there's a much more proactive side to it as well. So we do a lot of work around quality assurance as well. We're doing work with a government department at the moment around automating quality assurance to make sure that all of the advice that's being given on the phone is it's actually guidance, this is called, rather than advice, is of a consistent and high quality. And whereas before they might have just been using dip sampling and going down a manual score sheet, actually you can listen to every single telephone call and give a QA assessment of every single one of them. And that has really, for us as taxpayers, that means that overall I'm getting better value for money out of the services that are being provided to me, because I've got a machine listening and then just making sure that everything is going to the type of standard that I want. So I think people think too much about the big brother side of voice in the enterprise, and probably not enough about the positive benefits, as we were talking about before, archiving and things like QA and so on, and fraud detection as well in the insurance space. We do a lot of work around that. How do you identify potential fraud from a telephone call? And we got a sizable government grant recently to help our research on this. And the idea is to try and reduce premiums.
Yes.
I'm sure you would like your car insurance premium reduced. Yes. Preferably close to nothing if at all possible. Yeah. But it's but fraud costs the industry billions each year, and so anything that you can do to help reduce that ultimately is for the good of the economy. It's for the good of UK PLC.
So on the preventative side, I know that a big push around your technology and the research that you've done over the years is around speed. Are you at that stage where you are able to perhaps prevent further harm? So there is something going wrong within your organization. You don't necessarily want to find out about it 6 months later when somebody's gone rogue. Where are you now with the technology that you can offer for these large institutions?
So we pioneered the use of what are called GPU cards, so graphical processing units. So anyone who's a gamer will have seen one of these things, but they're big chunky cards that go in computers, which were designed to make graphics run really, really quickly, but now power a lot of deep learning, machine learning type of products. We pioneered the use of these GPU cards to actually turn speech into text and do speech processing to make it really, really quick. And that was basically one of those, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing in terms of when we went into this, because they weren't designed to do this at all, but we sort of subverted the architecture to make it work. And we actually work very closely with the manufacturer of these cards, and we've been doing some work recently to the point where we can take speech and process it to text at something like 2,000 times real time. So to give you an example of that, one card, so literally one physical card in a machine, you could give it 2,000 hours of audio, and it would take 1 hour to process that to text. I mean, that's an astonishing speed.
Yes.
And that, so what that means is you can actually begin to look at data in real time or near real time and say, do you know what, I can actually take a population of, a call center of 1,000 people, or, a trading floor of 10,000 people, or even an office of 20 people, it doesn't really matter, and begin to monitor what's being said in real time. From a sales perspective, maybe I can channel the call slightly differently. Again, this is not all about surveillance, Mark. This is about where else can I get value within my organization. Sure. Can I prompt my salesperson? I'm sure that most organizations would love it if partway through a call, someone said, well, we actually think, the call should go in this direction. So take the script here.
Yes.
I think that the work we did on speed early on has reaped an enormous amount of benefits for us now, because we can process speech into text, we can do biometric identification, all of these things at 100 times the speed that many other people can do.
You mentioned biometric identification. Where is that important? Because I think even for somebody listening into a conference call, I do this quite a lot, is if you've got a number of people and the quality isn't that good, it's who's saying that can be quite important in a conversation, because that can be quite different from another party, perhaps using almost the same words.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, biometric identification is really difficult in telephony because of that degradation that I spoke about. So we tend to use it for search more than anything else.
Okay.
So, imagine someone turned up and said, I've got 100,000 phone calls here and I'm looking for trader X. And we had this for one particular case that we did. We got all these calls and we're not sure whether this guy was on one of the calls. Here is a sample of his voice. Please go and find those calls where you believe he was on the call. And what we were able to do was go through all of these calls because the metadata was fairly sketchy, and actually identify where this person was talking and give a confidence score associated with that. So for us, search is really important, because you can imagine, take GDPR, for example. Yes. If you put in a subject access request and you say, I think I phoned one of your call centers a week or two ago, how on earth are you going to identify who that person was? So biometrics is really good for that. It's a bit dangerous for authentication. So we often say to people that don't add biometrics in place of another form of authentication. So use it to enhance it. So, for me, and particularly, so I'm sure you've seen all the stuff about deep fake and this sort of stuff, Mark, in terms of, So, I can generate, lots of people's voices. So imagine, you're Barack Obama now. I mean, I certainly wouldn't want to be accessing my voice activated bank account if I'm Barack Obama at the moment, given, You can imagine, can't you? It's probably the most ripped off voice on the internet
Yeah, I
now.
can imagine.
Yeah. So for us, we see that the use of biometrics has to be introduced carefully. And again, I think that some people have rushed it a bit. There have been some cases of people proving, a couple of BBC journalists proved non-identical twins. One managed to hack into the other's bank account using his voice biometrics. Now, the bank concerned have said they've upped their game since then, but nonetheless, it shows you how careful you have to be.
Yeah, sure. There's a number of other sectors of the market. Where do you see as the big opportunity, sort of the next area where you would want to focus? Because you've spoken about banking, you've spoken about insurance and government. What's the sort of the next area that you think would be quite interesting?
I think law enforcement, actually. We've been doing a lot of work in law enforcement recently, so particularly around things like police body cams. So a lot of police are now beginning to wear body cams, and the question is, how do you interpret that data? What use is that data if it's just going to an archive? So actually, we're seeing a big uptick in law enforcement, really as much to protect the citizen as to protect the police. If you can immediately analyze an event straight after it's taken place, you can potentially prevent injustice. You can start doing things like taking witness statements just using a body cam and having a transcript of that generated immediately. If you're sitting recording a police interview, you can generate a transcript. At the moment, those have to go into a queue and be typed up by humans, which may take several days before they're available to the case officer. So if you can give someone a rough draft as soon as the interview's over, you've got the ability to go through, mark it up, do stuff with it. So actually, law enforcement for me is probably one of the next key areas for us. Even analysing inbound calls. We've done work around, analysing calls coming into call centres in police forces around the world to see how best to deploy resources based on the things that people are saying.
Okay, that's interesting. I know that you need to jump off this call because you've got another meeting coming up. But just sort of to finish off, I know that you've done a lot of this work working direct. Where are you as regards partners? And if you are working with partners, and will be perhaps more in the future, what are perhaps some of the things that you're looking for? What are some of the issues?
So we're very much a partner-first company now. Like any organisation, when you start off, you have to sell direct. You have no choice because who's going to buy from? Who's going to partner with you if you can't even sell it yourself? So in every case, we've made sure that we've sold in directly into our first accounts. But we almost exclusively only work with partners now in terms of delivering solutions out. And, we've got hardware partners. So HPE, Hewlett Packard Enterprise, a very big partner of ours. We've done a lot of work with them over the last year and a half or so. And that's great because that gives us a global footprint in terms of where our technology is seen. But the flip side of that is we are a 30-person speech technology company in London. Yes. And you're dealing with a company that runs into tens, if not hundreds of thousands of other people. Yes. That can create some challenges.
Yes.
In terms of managing it. So for us, the major thing, we work with a lot of service partners now. We work with other technology partners. People are looking to embed our technology in their own technology, and integrating it as part of their own story. And the challenges we face with people like that are kind of the challenges I set up front, which were you need to understand why you're doing it and how it works. A lot of people come in and say, oh, yeah, it's just OCR for voice, isn't it? And they're like, no, it really isn't. And if you do that, then this partnership will not last very long. So education and scale in dealing with partners, I think, are the two biggest challenges. Yes. But we've been doing it for a while now. And I think that we're beginning to get that recipe right. Yeah. In terms of our partner story.
I think you could very easily be drowned by people that are partly wanting to educate themselves in the area of speech technology. So I won't be encouraging people, perhaps who are listening to this podcast, because it does go out to quite a wide range of people within software tech. But maybe if there's somebody sitting there with a really big project and they've got a lot of money to spend, you might want to prioritize those, bring those to the top of the queue.
Yeah, possibly.
Millions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So
You've got enough zeros in it, I'll definitely look at it. No, I'm to be honest with you, Mark, I'm always happy to talk to people about what we do. A lot of my job here at Intelligent Voice is about evangelizing what we do, talking to people about what we do, talking about speech technology. So no, always happy to speak to anyone. I'm going to regret having said this.
I think it's the old story. It's about not so much you've created a tool, but it's also the craft in knowing how to apply that tool that's really important. Exactly. And that comes from your experience over many years. I know you guys were looking at speech technology long before 2008 when you started Intelligent Voice. So I think fantastic for you coming on today. Really interesting podcast, and I know that there'll be a number of people that will have learnt something today. If you'd like to go and find out a little bit more about Intelligent Voice, the website is intelligentvoice.com, and that will give you an overview. And if you've got millions to spend, come and have a chat with Nigel. I'm sure you'll get his attention. If you just put in the subject line, "I've got millions to spend, can I speak to you, Nigel?" That will probably work.
Definitely, Mark. No, thanks very much. Really enjoyed it.
All right, that's super. Thank you very much for that. So, as always, with these podcasts, if you've got questions about this particular podcast, please send me an email, edwards@bossequity.com. If you've liked what you've heard, then please share it with friends. And if you've got any ideas for future podcasts, or if you've got a good story to tell like Nigel did today, then please get in contact. We would love to hear from you. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you.